The encounter. The wind howled across the barren landscape of HFY 7, carrying the sharp sting of red dust. Jake Carter adjusted his helmet and squinted through the gloom. His boots crunched against the cracked ground as he followed the faint, blinking signal on his wrist scanner. It wasn't supposed to be there. The mining colony had been abandoned for years. Nothing lived here, except shadows and old stories. Unknown distress signal, Jake muttered. His voice cracked through the helmet's comm. Coordinates. Right here. He stopped in front of a narrow cave opening hidden behind jagged rocks. The signal pulsed stronger now. His heart quickened. Every instinct told him to turn back, to leave this mystery behind. But curiosity, or maybe guilt from his past, pushed him forward. The cave was cold and silent, except for the soft beep of the scanner. Jake's flashlight cut through the dark, revealing deep scratches on the walls. Claw marks. Something, or someone, had fought here. The scanner beeped faster. He turned the light toward the back of the cave. His breath caught. A figure lay crumpled against the wall, chained with thick metallic cuffs. It was an alien woman. Her skin shimmered faintly like dark metal, and her short, silver hair clung to her forehead. Her eyes opened, a soft, glowing purple. Fear filled them as she tried to pull away. Hey. It's okay, Jake said, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. I'm here to help. The woman didn't speak. Her chest heaved with each shallow breath. Jake knelt beside her, examining the cuffs. Alien tech. He'd seen similar devices during the war, used by slavers. Who did this to you? He asked softly. Her lips parted. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. Dominary. Jake froze. The Dominary Syndicate. Ruthless, powerful, and known for enslaving entire species. If they were here, this wasn't a simple rescue. It was a death trap. Okay, we're getting you out of here, he said, pulling a compact laser cutter from his belt. The metal hissed and sparked as he sliced through the cuffs. The woman flinched when they fell, but her eyes stayed locked on his face. The ground trembled. A low rumble echoed from deeper within the cave. Jake's pulse raced. Move, he ordered. He grabbed her arm and helped her to her feet. She staggered but managed to stand. They sprinted toward the entrance, Jake half carrying her. Behind them, the ground split open with a deafening crack. A massive, spider-like drone emerged, its red sensors glowing like hungry eyes. Return the asset, a deep mechanical voice commanded, or be terminated. Jake aimed his pulse pistol and fired. The energy blast slammed into the drone's armor, leaving scorch marks but no real damage. Run, he shouted. They burst from the cave as the drone's weapons fired. Blue plasma bolts scorched the rocks around them. Jake pulled a small detonator from his belt and hurled it behind them. The explosion roared, sending rocks crashing down to block the cave's entrance. They didn't stop running. The wind carried the smell of burnt metal as the drone's muffled voice echoed from beneath the rubble. You cannot hide. We will find you. Jake and the alien woman reached the shelter of a rusted mining outpost half a mile away. He leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. The woman slid to the ground, clutching her wrists where the cuffs had been. Who are you? Jake asked. She hesitated, then whispered, Ceres. Why are they after you, Ceres? Her glowing eyes locked on his. Because I know their secret. They're coming for Earth. Jake's stomach turned cold. He looked out into the endless wasteland, heart pounding. The Dominary were already here. And now, Earth was in their sights. He glanced back at Ceres. Weak, hunted, but determined. We'll stop them, he said, voice firm. Together. But as he spoke, his wrist scanner crackled with a new signal. A voice, deep and metallic, whispered, We warned you. Now you die. The pursuit. The outpost's metal walls groaned under the force of the wind, sharp grains of sand striking the surface like tiny bullets. Jake Carter crouched beside Ceres, his pulse racing. His wrist scanner blinked with a pulsing red light. Tracking signal detected. The Dominary knew where they were. "We can't stay here," he muttered. Cirrus sat against the wall, her breathing shallow, skin pale beneath the metallic sheen. The cuffs had left deep bruises on her wrists. She winced as she tried to sit straighter. Jake knelt beside her. "Can you walk?" She gave a small nod. "I'll try." He offered his hand, and she grasped it. Her fingers were cold, trembling with exhaustion. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed. Outside, the scanner's signal grew stronger. Jake's heart pounded. The Dominary drones didn't just track. They hunted, relentless and merciless. The Syndicate's cruelty was legendary across human and alien colonies. He'd seen their handiwork during the war. Towns turned into graveyards. Civilians vanished overnight. And now, somehow, Cirrus was part of their plans. He guided her toward the back of the outpost, where an old mining tunnel led underground. The tunnels were unstable and dangerous, but staying above ground meant certain death. "Who are you to them?" he asked as they moved. "Why go through all this trouble to find you?" Cirrus stumbled. He caught her and waited until she steadied herself. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, looked haunted. "I was part of their experiment," she said softly. "A test subject. The Dominary. They were developing a neurotoxin. A weapon. One that targets human brain chemistry." Jake's breath caught. "A bioweapon." She nodded. "Humans are resilient. Your minds adapt faster than other species. The Dominary hate that. So they created something to break that resilience, to turn fear into an unstoppable force." The scanner's signal spiked. Jake's eyes snapped to the screen. 3 incoming signatures. "Fast. Move," he barked. He pulled Cirrus into the tunnel entrance. The ground trembled as something heavy landed outside the outpost. Through a crack in the wall, Jake saw sleek, spider-like drones descend from the sky. Their metal limbs clicked against the rocky ground. Red sensor eyes scanned the surroundings. "Locate the fugitives," one drone commanded in a cold, mechanical voice. Jake led Cirrus deeper into the tunnel. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the smell of damp metal and ancient dust. The walls creaked ominously. They had only the flashlight beam to guide them. Behind them, the drones entered the tunnel. Their legs clanged against the floor, echoing like an executioner's footsteps. Cirrus faltered, her body swaying. Jake tightened his grip around her waist. "Stay with me, Cirrus," he whispered. "We're almost there." "Too tired," she gasped. Jake glanced back. The red glow of the drone's sensors grew brighter. They were gaining ground. His mind raced. The mining tunnel split into 3 paths ahead. He steered Cirrus toward the leftmost passage, hoping the twists and turns would buy time. "Why does this weapon matter so much?" Jake asked as they stumbled through the winding path. "Because fear," Cirrus said between ragged breaths. "Fear breaks trust. The Dominary want to paralyze human defenses. If fear spreads, soldiers stop fighting. Leaders surrender." Jake cursed under his breath. Humanity had won the war years ago, but at a terrible cost. Now the enemy wanted to win without firing a single shot. Fear, the oldest weapon in history. A sudden roar shook the tunnel. From the right passage, a drone emerged, blocking their path. Its red eyes flared. "Target acquired," it said. "Run." Jake pushed Cirrus to the side and raised his pulse pistol. He fired 3 shots. The energy blast slammed into the drone's chassis, leaving glowing dents but no real damage. The drone lunged, firing a stream of plasma bolts. Jake dove to the ground, dragging Cirrus with him. The wall behind them exploded in a shower of rock and debris. Jake grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt, armed it, and threw it with all his strength. "Down," he shouted. The grenade exploded with a blinding flash. The drone shrieked as the blast tore through its sensors, leaving it staggering and disoriented. Jake pulled Cirrus to her feet. They sprinted through the smoke. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern filled with old mining equipment. In the center stood a rusted transport skiff on magnetic rails. Jake's heart leaped. If the power core still worked, they could escape deeper into the tunnels. "Get in," he ordered. Cirrus climbed onto the skiff and collapsed against the controls. Jake yanked open a side panel and found the ancient ignition system. He slammed the manual start button. The engine sputtered, groaned, then roared to life. The drones appeared at the tunnel's entrance, red eyes glowing through the dust. Plasma fire erupted toward the skiff. Jake leaped aboard and slammed the throttle. The skiff lurched forward just as the drones fired. Bolts of plasma seared past them. One shot grazed Jake's shoulder, burning through his suit and searing his skin. He bit back a scream. The skiff accelerated along the rails into darkness. The drone fire faded behind them. Cirrus sat up, her face pale. "They're not giving up." "They never do," Jake said, breathing heavily. "But neither do we." The skiff sped deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels. Behind them, the drone's pursuit echoed through the cavern like a relentless drumbeat of death. The safe house. The mining skiff rattled through the tunnel's darkness, its engine groaning under the strain. Jake Carter gripped the control panel with one hand, the other pressed against his scorched shoulder. The plasma burn throbbed with each heartbeat, but pain could wait. The enemy wasn't far behind. Beside him, Cirrus sat slumped, her breath shallow. Sweat dripped from her temples, despite the cold air. Her skin, usually smooth with a faint metallic sheen, now looked dull and cracked like tarnished silver. Her body trembled, weakened by whatever toxins the Dominary had used on her. The skiff shuddered as it hit a bend, screeching along the ancient rails. Sparks sprayed into the darkness. The tunnel walls blurred past them, endless and oppressive. Jake checked his wrist scanner. The drone signals had disappeared, but he didn't trust that silence. Dominary trackers were patient. Predators didn't chase forever. They waited for their prey to collapse from exhaustion. "Cirrus," Jake said, voice low. "Stay with me. We're almost there." She didn't respond. Her head drooped forward. Jake reached out and gently shook her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open. The soft purple glow had dimmed. "Poison," she whispered. "Still, inside me." Jake cursed under his breath. The Dominary's fear toxin didn't just affect minds. It attacked the nervous system, leaving victims weak and suggestible. If the poison reached her brainstem, it would kill her. He tapped his helmet's comm system. "Command, this is Carter. Emergency extraction requested. Priority 1. Static answered him. The mining tunnels were too deep. No signal would get through. The skiff's headlights revealed a rusted platform ahead. The rails ended abruptly, buried beneath collapsed rock. Jake killed the engine. The sudden silence left only the sound of their breathing and the faint, distant hum of machinery far behind them. The drones were still searching. "Come on," Jake said, gently lifting Cirrus's arm over his shoulders. Her weight sagged against him. Her breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle. They stepped off the skiff onto the cracked concrete platform. The air was damp and stale. The abandoned mining facility lay ahead, hidden beneath kilometers of rock. Few remembered this place even existed. During the war, rebel forces had used it as a base. Now, it was just a graveyard of forgotten battles. Jake led Cirrus through a corroded airlock, forcing the manual override. The door screeched open, revealing a small control room lined with rusted monitors and dormant equipment. He guided her to an old cot against the wall. She collapsed onto it with a groan. He knelt beside her. Her skin had turned cold, her veins darkening with thin, branching lines. The toxin was spreading. "Okay, Cirrus, stay with me," Jake said, voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "I'm going to fix this." She grabbed his wrist, her grip weak. If it gets too far, you have to leave me." "Not happening." Jake said. "I've left people behind before. Never again." Her glowing eyes softened. "You don't even know me." "Yeah, well, humanity has a habit of saving strangers." He forced a smile. "Besides, you're not just anyone. You've got information that could save Earth. So, no pressure." She managed a faint, pained smile. "No pressure." Jake stood and moved to the control console. He ripped off a metal panel and exposed the tangled wires. If the emergency medkit was still in the wall compartment, it might have an antitoxin injector. The Dominary's bioweapon was designed for human minds. Maybe the standard neural stabilizer could slow it down in Ceres. He rewired the console and reactivated emergency power. The lights flickered dimly to life. He crossed the room, pried open a hidden cabinet, and found the medkit. Inside was a single neural stabilizer injector. He returned to Ceres, knelt beside her, and placed the injector against her neck. "This might hurt," he warned. She gave a weak nod. The injector hissed. Ceres arched her back with a sharp gasp. Her body convulsed for several seconds before she slumped onto the cot, unconscious. The dark lines on her skin faded slightly. Her breathing steadied. Jake exhaled slowly. "Hang in there, Ceres." The console crackled behind him. A voice broke through the static. "Jake Carter, come in." Jake spun toward the comm panel. The voice was familiar. Captain Reyes, his old commanding officer. "Reyes, I need an evac," Jake said into the comm. "I've got an alien survivor with critical information. The Dominary are here. They're planning to deploy a fear-based neurotoxin against Earth." "Copy that," Reyes said. "Sending coordinates for extraction. Hold tight." A map flashed on the cracked screen. An old surface exit 3 kilometers away. Jake's chest unclenched. Help was coming. He sat beside Ceres and checked her pulse. It was stronger. Her skin regained its metallic sheen. "See, told you I'd fix it," Jake whispered. Her eyes remained closed, but her lips twitched as though she heard him. The console crackled again. "Jake?" Reyes's voice returned. "Yeah. Who's the alien with you?" "Her name's Ceres. She escaped the Dominary. She knows how to stop the bioweapon." Silence. A long, cold silence. "Reyes." Jake pressed. "Get away from her," Reyes said, his voice now sharp. "She's not what you think." Jake froze. "What are you talking about?" "She's a Dominary operative. A plant. They use these bait scenarios to track and infiltrate resistance networks." Jake's eyes darted to Ceres. She lay motionless, breathing steadily. Her wrists still bore the scars from the cuffs. The fear in her eyes when he found her had seemed real. Hadn't it? "You're wrong," Jake said. "Listen to me, soldier," Reyes barked. "She's compromised. If you bring her topside, they'll track you. They're probably tracking you right now." Jake's wrist scanner blinked. His stomach dropped. The signal was back, strong and steady. The Dominary had found them. He raised his pistol and pointed it at Ceres's chest. "Jake," Reyes said, voice tense. "Take the shot. Now, before it's too late." Jake's finger hovered over the trigger. The woman he'd risked his life to save lay defenseless before him. She had begged for help. She had warned him about the weapon. But what if it was all a trap? The floor trembled. Faint metallic footsteps echoed through the tunnels. The drones were closing in. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. Ceres's eyes opened, glowing purple, wide with fear. "Jake, please. It's not me. It's him. Reyes works for them." Jake's comm crackled. "Pull the trigger," Reyes ordered. "That's a direct order." The footsteps grew louder. Jake's mind raced. 2 choices, 1 bullet. He had to decide. The betrayal. The skiff's old lights flickered as the footsteps echoed louder, rhythmic and unyielding. Jake Carter's pulse roared in his ears. His wrist trembled as he kept the pulse pistol aimed at Ceres's chest. Her glowing purple eyes stared up at him, wide with fear and pain. "Jake," Reyes's voice crackled through the comm. "This is your last chance. Pull the trigger." Cirrus didn't move. Her breathing was labored, her skin still slick with sweat from the toxin's lingering effects. Yet her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "You know it's him," she whispered. "Reyes works for the Dominary." Jake's mind whirled. Reyes had been his commander for years, a hero of the HFY campaign. The man who'd saved his unit when everything had gone to hell. But Cirrus, she hadn't tried to harm him once. The fear in her eyes when he found her chained had been raw, real, or had it? The footsteps drew closer. Jake's heart pounded. If he hesitated any longer, none of this would matter. He made his choice. Jake spun toward the entrance, firing a volley of shots into the tunnel's shadows. The blue blasts illuminated the figures emerging from the darkness. Dominary drones, sleek and deadly, skittering along the walls and floor. Behind them strode a man in human combat armor, Captain Reyes. His helmet's visor glowed crimson. Jake's stomach turned. "Reyes." Reyes stepped forward, rifle raised. "You should have followed orders, Carter." His voice, cold and devoid of its usual warmth, crackled through the comm. "We could have ended this quickly." The drone surged forward. Jake fired at the lead machine, shattering its optical sensors. "Cirrus, move," he shouted. Cirrus sprang from the cot, her movements sluggish but determined. Jake hurled a smoke grenade, then grabbed her arm and bolted toward the maintenance hatch at the back of the room. The grenade hissed, releasing a thick, gray cloud. The drones hesitated, recalibrating their sensors. "Don't let them escape." Reyes's voice cut through the smoke. Jake shoved Cirrus through the hatch. They slid down a metal ladder into the lower tunnels. Behind them, the drone's footsteps clanged as they pursued. "Reyes was my commander," Jake panted as they ran. How the hell did he end up working with the Dominary? "He was always working with them," Cirrus said, her voice trained. "The Dominary don't conquer with brute force alone. They find leaders, corrupt them, turn them into puppets." Reyes sold out humanity to save himself. Jake clenched his jaw. Betrayal burned deep. He remembered how Reyes had been celebrated as a war hero after the HFY campaign, praised for uncovering enemy positions, saving thousands. Now he saw the truth. Reyes hadn't uncovered enemy intel. He'd handed it to them. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a rusted maintenance platform overlooked a sheer drop into darkness. The sound of approaching drones grew louder. "Now what?" Jake muttered. Cirrus pointed to a narrow steel beam spanning the gap. On the other side, another tunnel entrance waited. "Cross," she said. "I'll go first." She climbed onto the beam, moving cautiously. Jake followed. The metal groaned beneath their combined weight. The drones reached the edge. One fired a plasma bolt. The beam vibrated as the shot struck it. Cirrus wobbled, arms flailing. Jake lunged forward and caught her wrist just as she slipped. The drones fired again. Sparks rained down. Jake gritted his teeth and hauled Cirrus up. They scrambled to the far side and ducked into the tunnel. The drones hesitated, calculating the risk of the beam's collapse. Jake didn't wait. He aimed his pistol and shot the beam's support bolts. The structure groaned, then collapsed with a deafening crash. The lead drone fell into the abyss. The others retreated. For now, they were safe. The tunnel opened into a cavern. In the center stood a weathered communications tower. Jake recognized it, a long-forgotten rebel transmission hub from the war. "If we can get this working, we can warn Earth," Jake said. Cirrus knelt beside the control panel, her fingers gliding over the cracked keys. The system sputtered to life. Static filled the cavern. "They've jammed civilian frequencies," she said, "but military comms might still work." Jake keyed in an emergency encryption code. The screen blinked green. "Command, this is Sergeant Jake Carter," he said into the mic. "Dominary forces active on HFY. Bioweapon targeting human populations. Repeat, bioweapon threat imminent. Static. Then a voice. Sergeant Carter. This is Colonel Evans, Earth Defense Command. We've detected increased Dominary activity. What's your status? Compromised. Captain Rice is compromised. He's working with the Dominary. We have an asset with critical intel. Evans's voice turned sharp. Hold your position. Extraction team inbound. Relief washed over Jake. Saris turned to him. They'll come for us now. Rise won't stop. The comm crackled again. Jake, came Reyes's voice, hijacking the signal. You can't win. The Dominary are already here. Earth's defenses will fall. And when they do, you'll know this was your fault. Jake stared at the console. His pulse slowed. No, he said quietly. This is your fault. And when we're done, you'll know that humanity never bows. Rise laughed coldly. We'll see. The signal cut. Jake turned to Saris. We have to get to the surface. If that extraction team doesn't reach us first, Rise will. They left the cavern, climbing a narrow shaft toward the surface. The closer they got, the thicker the air became with the metallic tang of plasma fire. The final hatch led to the open surface of HFY 7's wasteland. Jake pried it open. Starlight bathed the landscape. In the distance, black silhouettes descended from the sky. Dominary drop pods, Jake said grimly. They're sending everything. Saris's voice shook. If they deploy the toxin here, Earth won't have a chance. The wind shifted, carrying a faint, high-pitched hum. Drones, swarming toward their position. Jake tightened his grip on his pistol. Get behind me. The first drone appeared over the ridge. Then the second. A dozen more followed, red eyes gleaming like predators catching the scent of blood. And behind them walked Reyes. His helmet reflected the pale moonlight. He carried a long-range plasma rifle, its barrel glowing with deadly blue light. End of the line, Carter, Reyes said through his helmet speaker. You should have trusted me. Jake squared his shoulders. His pulse pistol hummed in his hand. Yeah, Jake said. And you shouldn't have underestimated me. Reyes fired. Jake dove aside as the plasma bolt scorched the ground where he'd stood. The drones advanced, weapons charging. Jake opened fire. Plasma bolts sliced through the night. One drone collapsed. Another staggered backward, sparks spewing from its core. Saris raised her hands. The veins in her temples pulsed. The air vibrated. The lead drone's sensors flickered. It stopped, twitched, then turned its weapon toward Reyes. What the hell? Ride shouted. Saris's voice was tight. Neural. Override. For Dominary tech. But I can't hold it long. Jake fired again, destroying 2 more drones. Saris forced another to turn on its own kind. But Reyes wasn't done. He aimed his rifle at Saris. Jake, she cried. Jake didn't think. He hurled himself between them as the rifle fired. The plasma bolt slammed into his side. Pain exploded through his body. He collapsed, gasping. Saris screamed. The ground trembled. The remaining drones convulsed, sparks bursting from their joints. They collapsed in unison. Reyes cursed and retreated toward his transport. Saris knelt beside Jake, pressing her hands against his wound. Stay with me, she pleaded. Jake's vision blurred. Above them, distant lights streaked across the sky. Earth's extraction team was coming. But so was the Dominary fleet. The rescue. The sky above HFY 7 crackled with streaks of incoming ships. The sharp whine of thrusters filled the night air, accompanied by the rhythmic hum of approaching Dominary war drones. Jake Carter lay sprawled on the cracked ground, plasma burn searing his side. His vision blurred, and the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. Jake, stay with me. Saris's voice pierced through the haze. Her glowing purple eyes swam in his fading sight as she knelt beside him, hands trembling over the charred edges of his armor. He tried to speak, but the pain stole his breath. Above them, Dark shapes loomed in the sky, dominary drop pods, sleek, insect-like machines that released swarms of drones before landing with bone-rattling force. Ceres pressed her hands against his wound. "I can slow the damage, but you have to fight. Jake. Please." Jake clenched his teeth. His muscles spasmed as a cold, electric sensation spread from her hands. Her skin pulsed faintly as she channeled energy into his body. The pain dulled to a sharp throb. His vision cleared just as the first drone arrived, its legs clicking against the rocks. Red optics glared down at them. "Target reacquired," the drone said in its mechanical monotone. Its plasma turret powered up. Jake raised his pistol and fired. The blast struck the drone's eye, shattering it. The machine collapsed with a metallic screech. "Move," Jake shouted, grabbing Ceres's wrist. They sprinted across the open ground toward the ridge. The terrain was uneven and slick with iron-rich dust. Behind them, more drones poured from the drop pods. Plasma bolts seared the ground at their heels. "Extraction team should be close," Jake panted. "We just have to reach the beacon." Ceres glanced at the sky. "If they make it before the Dominary fleet arrives." The ridge leveled into a narrow canyon. Jake's wrist scanner blinked with a blue light, a sign the extraction beacon was near. They reached a jagged rock face where a battered metal dish protruded from the ground. The extraction beacon hummed softly, its signal pulsing skyward. "Hold here," Jake said, scanning the horizon. A high-pitched screech echoed through the canyon. Ceres stiffened. "They're here," she whispered. From the shadows, drones appeared. Dozens of them. Their glowing eyes lit the canyon walls like a swarm of predatory fireflies. Jake cursed and raised his weapon. "We hold this ground." The first line of drones opened fire. Plasma bolts crackled through the air. Jake ducked behind a boulder and returned fire. His shots struck 3 drones, but more advanced. Ceres knelt beside him, breathing hard. Her eyes unfocused as she raised her hands. The air grew thick with static. The front row of drones faltered, their limbs jerking erratically before collapsing. Blood trickled from Ceres's nose. "Careful," Jake said. "You can't overdo it." "I don't have a choice," she said, voice strained. "They're coming to kill us." The next wave surged forward. Jake's pistol hummed with each blast, but his energy cell dwindled with each shot. From the canyon rim came the distinct, echoing sound of a plasma sniper rifle. Blue streaks of light sliced through the drones, reducing them to molten wreckage. Jake's comm crackled. "Carter, this is Colonel Evans. Sit tight. We've got you covered." 2 human dropships descended into the canyon, engines roaring. Soldiers in black armor rappelled down ropes, their rifles barking as they formed a defensive perimeter. Relief flooded Jake's chest. "Ceres, they're here." Ceres collapsed against the boulder, her skin pale and slick with sweat. Jake wrapped an arm around her waist and half-carried her toward the dropships. But as they neared the closest one, Jake's wrist scanner blared a warning. "Incoming projectile. Fast. Big. Incoming," he roared. The warning came too late. From the sky, a Dominary cruiser fired a single plasma lance. The blue beam struck the nearest dropship. The explosion sent shockwaves through the canyon, hurling Jake and Ceres to the ground. The remaining soldiers scattered for cover. Debris rained down in fiery shards. Jake coughed, blinking away dust. The second dropship hovered higher, attempting to evade fire. And then the Dominary ground troops arrived. They came like phantoms, tall, armored figures with segmented exoskeletons. Their helmets bore no markings, just smooth, reflective plates that gave them an insectile appearance. Plasma rifles hissed as they advanced. Jake recognized their elite unit, the Void Reapers. "Stay down," he told Ceres. He fired at the lead Reaper. The plasma blast struck the soldier's shoulder, barely denting the armor. The Reaper turned toward Jake, raising a sleek, curved weapon. Before it could fire, a soldier from the human team launched a shoulder-mounted missile. The projectile struck the Reaper's chest. The alien stumbled and fell. "Fall back," Colonel Evans bellowed, firing his rifle from behind a metal barrier. The soldiers regrouped around Jake and Cirrus. Two of them grabbed Cirrus's arms, lifting her into the remaining dropship. Jake followed, wincing as his side burned anew. The ship's side doors slammed shut. The engines roared. Plasma bolts hammered the hull as it lifted off. Through the window, Jake saw the canyon below. The Dominary forces swarmed the abandoned beacon, surrounding Reyes, who stood with his weapon raised. He didn't fire. He simply watched the dropship rise with a cold, calculating stare. And then Reyes raised his hand, pointing directly at Jake. Jake's blood turned to ice. This wasn't over. The dropship accelerated, breaking through the thin atmosphere. As the blue haze gave way to the black void of space, Jake exhaled in relief. Earth wasn't safe yet, but they had escaped. The medic strapped Cirrus to a medical pod. Electrodes monitored her brain activity while automated syringes injected stabilizers into her bloodstream. "She gonna make it?" Jake asked. The medic nodded. "For now. Whatever toxin they gave her is advanced, but the stabilizers are slowing the damage." Jake slumped into a seat beside her pod. His body ached. His mind raced. He thought of Reyes' betrayal, the endless swarm of drones, the Dominary fleet poised to strike. "Sergeant Carter," Colonel Evans said, sitting across from him. His face was lined, eyes grim. "Your report said she has information about the bioweapon." Jake gestured toward Cirrus. "Yeah, she was their prisoner. She says they've developed a fear-based neurotoxin, something designed to break human minds. And Reyes is helping them deploy it." Evans cursed under his breath. That bastard was a war hero. "Yeah, well, turns out he was playing a long game. The Dominary are planning to deploy the weapon soon. Any idea when?" Cirrus stirred in the pod. Her eyelids fluttered open. "Soon," she whispered. "They plan to strike the Mars Defense Network first. Once the satellites fall, Earth will go blind." Evans stood and barked orders into his comm. "Get me Mars Command immediately." The dropship's engines shifted to full burn. Earth's blue sphere appeared in the distance, serene and unaware of the storm approaching. Cirrus turned her head toward Jake. Her eyes were dim but steady. "It's only the beginning. The Dominary don't just want Earth. They want your spirit broken." Jake took her hand and squeezed it gently. "They came for the wrong species if they think fear's gonna stop us." She smiled faintly. "Let's hope you're right." The comm crackled again. "Sir," said a technician, "we've intercepted a transmission from the Dominary fleet." "Patch it through," Evans ordered. A voice filled the cabin, cold, metallic, and unmistakably familiar. "Earth will burn," Reyes said, "and humanity will learn the true meaning of fear." Jake's jaw tightened. "Let him talk," he muttered, "because when we find him, we'll teach him what humans really do when we're afraid." The showdown. The stars outside the dropship's window shimmered like fragile glass, distant and untouchable. But beyond their cold beauty, something darker stirred. The Dominary fleet had arrived. Jake Carter stood beside Cirrus's medical pod, gripping the metal edge until his knuckles turned white. The pain from his plasma burn pulsed with each heartbeat, but he pushed it aside. The words from Reyes's intercepted message echoed in his mind. "Earth will burn, and humanity will learn the true meaning of fear." Fear. The weapon the Dominary wanted to use to break Earth's defenses, to shatter human will before the first bomb fell. Cirrus's eyes fluttered open. The purple glow was weaker now, like a fading ember. Her breathing had steadied, but the toxin still gnawed at her nervous system. "Jake," she whispered. He crouched beside her. "I'm here." Her lips trembled. "They're coming." "I know." "No, I mean they've already started." Her eyes darted to the window. "The neurotoxin. The first deployment wave is targeting the Mars Defense Network." Jake turned to Colonel Evans, who stood across the cabin, issuing orders to the crew. "Evans, Jake called. Mars is the first target. If the satellites go down, Earth goes blind. Evans cursed under his breath. He activated the comm panel. Mars command. Come in. Static. The signal was already being jammed. Can we counter the jamming? Evans barked. The comm officer shook his head. Dominary encryption is adaptive. We'd need a direct uplink to their command ship. Jake's heart raced. Sarah said she can override their systems. If we can get her close enough to the command ship, she might break through. Evans's eyes narrowed. That ship will be surrounded by drones, fighters, and God knows what else. Jake straightened. We don't have a choice. We lose Mars, we lose Earth. Evans nodded grimly. Prep the stealth shuttle. The plan formed quickly. Jake and Cirrus would take the shuttle, approach the Dominary flagship, and Cirrus would attempt to override the neurotoxin control systems. Meanwhile, Earth's defense fleet would engage the Dominary armada to buy time. As they prepared to launch, Jake knelt beside Cirrus. She sat in the shuttle's co-pilot seat, her face pale but resolute. You sure about this? He asked. Cirrus gave a weak smile. You saved me. Now it's my turn. The shuttle's engines hummed to life. Its dark, angular hull absorbed radar signals, allowing it to slip through the enemy's outer defenses. Jake gripped the controls and accelerated toward the Dominary fleet. As they closed the distance, the enemy's massive command ship came into view. A colossal black monolith floating above Mars, surrounded by swarms of drones. Its surface pulsed with veins of crimson energy. That's where the control hub is, Cirrus said, pointing to a cluster of antennae near the rear. Get me close to that. The shuttle's cloaking field held as they weaved through the patrols. Jake guided the craft toward the command ship's rear docking array. The comm crackled suddenly. Hello, Jake. Reyes's voice drawled through the cabin. Jake's stomach clenched. We see you, Reyes continued. Nice try with the stealth approach, but you never could hide from me. The shuttle lurched as plasma beams targeted their position. Jake swerved, avoiding the blasts by meters. The enemy drones swarmed toward them. Hang on, Jake shouted, jerking the controls into a sharp dive. He skimmed the ship's hull, racing toward the antenna cluster. There's a maintenance hatch ahead, Cirrus said, gripping the console as the shuttle shook. Jake fired the docking clamps just as a plasma blast struck the tail. The shuttle slammed into the hull. Warning lights flashed across the console. Seal engaged, Jake gasped. Let's move. He grabbed his rifle and helped Cirrus from her seat. Her legs wobbled, but she stayed upright. Together, they climbed through the docking tube and into the Dominary ship. The interior was eerily silent. Black, metallic walls pulsed with crimson veins of energy, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. This way, Cirrus whispered, leading him toward the control hub. They reached a circular chamber where a massive cylindrical core rose from the floor to the ceiling. Streams of data scrolled across translucent screens. In the center stood a pedestal with an interface ring. Cirrus staggered to the pedestal and placed her hands on the surface. Her skin darkened, veins glowing faintly as she connected with the alien system. Time, Jake asked, checking his scanner. 2 minutes to override, she said, eyes unfocused. But they know we're here. As if on cue, the doors hissed open. Reyes entered, flanked by 2 towering Dominary enforcers. His helmet was off, revealing his scared face and cold eyes. His plasma rifle was leveled at Jake. Game over, Carter, Reyes said. Step away from the control core. Jake raised his rifle, finger poised over the trigger. You betrayed everything we'd fought for. Reyes smirked. No, I saw the truth. Humanity isn't strong. It's stubborn. The Dominary showed me that survival means bending before you break. Cirrus's hands trembled as she worked the interface. The core's hum intensified. Don't let her finish, Reyes snapped. The enforcers raised their weapons. Jake dove sideways as plasma fire erupted. He fired back, hitting one enforcer in the leg. The alien staggered but didn't fall. The second advanced on Cirrus. "No," Jake roared, emptying his magazine into the creature's torso. The enforcer collapsed inches from the control core. Reyes charged towards Cirrus. Jake tackled him. They crashed to the floor, grappling for the plasma pistol. Reyes slammed an elbow into Jake's wounded side. Pain exploded through Jake's body. Reyes pinned him, pressing the pistol's muzzle against Jake's forehead. "You never learned when to quit," Reyes sneered. "Yeah," Jake gasped, forcing a bloody grin. "But you never learned to check your surroundings." Cirrus's eyes snapped open. The core flared with violet light. Energy surged through the floor. The Dominary enforcer convulsed, then collapsed. Reyes's pistol fizzled. "What?" Jake headbutted him, knocking the weapon aside. He rolled free, snatched his knife, and plunged it into Reyes's thigh. Reyes screamed. Cirrus collapsed against the core. "I did it," she whispered. On the main display, Dominary drones across Mars fell from the sky like metal rain. The fleet's formation broke as confusion spread through their ranks. Jake retrieved his pistol and aimed it at Reyes, who clutched his wounded leg. "It's over," Jake said. Reyes bared his teeth. "Not yet." He tapped a device on his wrist. The core's energy shifted from purple to crimson. "Failsafe," Cirrus gasped. "He's activating a self-destruct." The core's surface cracked, molten energy bleeding from the fissures. A countdown appeared. 60 seconds. Jake shot Reyes through the chest. The traitor collapsed, eyes wide with disbelief. "Can you stop it?" Jake asked Cirrus. She shook her head. "The system's locked." Jake helped her to her feet. "Then we run." They sprinted back to the docking hatch. The countdown reached 30 seconds as they sealed the shuttle's hatch. Jake ignited the engines. The damaged thrusters sputtered, then roared. The shuttle peeled away from the command ship just as the core detonated. The explosion engulfed the flagship, ripping it apart in a blinding cascade of blue and crimson energy. The shockwave hurled the shuttle through space. Alarms blared. Jake wrestled the controls, stabilizing the craft as Mars loomed ahead. Behind them, the Dominary fleet scattered, leaderless and disoriented. Earth's defense forces surged forward, pressing the advantage. Jake slumped in his seat, breathless. Cirrus sat beside him, eyes closed. "Cirrus," he asked. She opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "We did it." Mars remained safe. Earth's defenses stood unbroken. And the Dominary's greatest weapon, fear, had failed. But Jake's thoughts lingered on Reyes's last expression, not anger, but certainty. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The last stand. The shuttle trembled as it cut through Mars's thin atmosphere, the engines whining from the strain. Jake Carter sat at the controls, his hands locked around the flight stick. His muscles ached, his side throbbed with each breath, and dried blood crusted along his uniform. The Dominary command ship was gone, destroyed in a fiery detonation that had cracked the sky. But the war wasn't over. Beside him, Cirrus lay strapped into the co-pilot's seat. Her skin, usually faintly metallic and smooth, had turned ashen. The strain of overriding the Dominary neural network had drained her. The toxins still fought to consume her nervous system. Jake adjusted the ship's trajectory. Ahead, Earth floated in the void like a fragile marble. Its oceans shimmered beneath swirling clouds. The home they'd fought to protect was still safe. For now. Cirrus stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing the faint glow of her purple eyes. "Did we do it?" she asked, voice weak. Jake forced a smile. "Yeah, we took down the command ship. The drones on Mars are offline. Earth's defenses are holding." Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "Good." The comm system crackled. Jake keyed it open. "Shuttle 7, this is Earth Defense Command. Identify yourself." "Sergeant Jake Carter," he replied. "With Cirrus, the escaped Dominary captive. We disabled the command ship, but the fight's not over. Confirmed, Sergeant, the voice said. Dominary Fleet is regrouping at Luna Lagrange Point 2. They're preparing a final assault. Jake's stomach turned. Luna L2 was the perfect staging ground. From there, the enemy could bypass the Mars defense network and strike Earth directly. What assets do we have? Jake asked. Fleets deploying every available ship, the operator replied. But the Dominary outnumber us 5-1. We estimate less than 4 hours before the attack begins. Jake muted the comm and turned to Cirrus. They're regrouping at Luna L2. Cirrus's eyes widened. That's where the backup transmitter is. I didn't have time to disable it during the hack. If they reestablish control, they can reactivate the fear toxin remotely. Then we stop them, Jake said, jaw tightening. Cirrus tried to sit up but gasped in pain. The toxin's black veins stretched across her neck like spiderwebs. You're in no shape to fight, Jake said. She gripped his wrist. You need me to break their encryption. The toxin is already primed. If they reactivate the network, Earth's population will drown in fear before a single soldier lands. Jake's mind raced. They were running on fumes, injured, outnumbered, and up against a technologically superior enemy. It was a suicide mission. He gave a grim nod. Let's finish this. The shuttle rocketed toward Luna L2, skimming along Mars' gravity well before slingshotting into position. As they neared the Dominary staging ground, the enemy fleet came into view. The warships hovered like dark, metal leviathans. Hundreds of drones swarmed between the vessels, repairing damage and deploying weapon arrays. In the center of the formation was the backup transmitter, a colossal spire mounted on a floating command platform. Crimson tendrils of energy crackled along its surface. Jake guided the shuttle through the debris field left from previous battles. Cirrus's eyes stayed fixed on the transmitter. That core, she said, voice faint. It's designed to amplify the toxin across Earth's atmosphere. How do we stop it? She hesitated. We need to overload the core from the inside. But if we do that, the explosion will vaporize the platform. And us, Jake finished. Cirrus gave a slight nod. Well, Jake said, forcing a grin, no one lives forever. He angled the shuttle toward the underside of the command platform. Plasma beams arced through space as drones detected their approach. Jake fired the shuttle's pulse cannons, clearing a path toward a maintenance hatch. Docking now, he said, maneuvering into place. The clamps locked with a metallic thud. The hatch opened. Jake and Cirrus climbed into the platform's underbelly. The artificial gravity engaged with a bone-rattling jolt. The corridor stretched ahead in eerie silence, bathed in faint red light. The metal beneath their feet thrummed with the transmitter's growing power. This way, Cirrus said, gripping the wall for support. Jake followed, rifle raised. Every corner could hide Dominary enforcers. The transmitter's core chamber lay at the end of a long hallway. As they neared the door, the lights flickered and died. Footsteps echoed in the dark. Jake switched to infrared. 3 figures emerged from the shadows. The central figure's silhouette was unmistakable. Reyes, Jake growled. The traitorous captain stepped into the dim glow of the core chamber's emergency lights. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken, but his mouth twisted in a smug smile. Persistent as always, Carter, Reyes said. But you're too late. The core's activation sequence is nearly complete. Jake tightened his grip on the rifle. Why, Reyes? Why sell out your own species? Reyes tilted his head. Because humans are weak. We're driven by fear. The Dominary understand that. They don't fight fear, they use it. By joining them, I get to survive. Thrive. You're pathetic, Jake spat. Reyes' eyes flicked to Cirrus. And you were supposed to be the key. The Dominary spent years perfecting the neurotoxin using your genetic markers. You were meant to lead us to Earth's neural collapse. Cirrus's face paled. I was just a test subject. Reyes laughed. No, you were the template. The toxin is encoded with your neural signature. You're connected to it, always have been. Jake's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means, Reyes said, that if she dies, the toxin's network collapses. Kill her, Carter, and you save Earth. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Jake's pulse raced. His eyes met Cirrus. She shook her head, tears glistening. He's lying. Am I? Reyes stepped aside, revealing the core's interface. The display showed a countdown. 3 o'clock, 2:59, 2:58. 3 minutes, Reyes said. You can overload the core, but you won't have time to escape. Or you can kill Cirrus and the network dies instantly. Save yourselves. Save Earth. Jake's finger twitched on the trigger. Cirrus's voice cracked. Jake, don't listen. He didn't. He fired. The plasma bolt struck Reyes in the chest. The traitor's eyes widened as he crumpled to the floor. Let's end this, Jake said. Cirrus stumbled to the core's interface. Her hands hovered over the alien symbols. It's locked, she said. Manual override only. Jake sprinted to the core's maintenance panel. The heat from the energy field radiated through his gloves. He yanked off the cover and found the manual release lever. How long after I pull this? He asked. 10 seconds. Cirrus replied. Not enough time to get clear. Jake's throat tightened. Cirrus, you have to go. She shook her head. I'm linked to the network. If I leave, the overload won't complete. Plasma fire rattled behind them as Dominarian forcers poured into the chamber. Jake fired back, taking down 2. But more advanced. Jake, Cirrus called. Now. He hesitated, just for a moment, then slammed the lever. The core roared as energy surged into the containment field. The countdown hit 0:10, 0:09, 0:08. Cirrus staggered but stayed upright, channeling her mental link to guide the energy into the core. The black veins in her skin darkened as the toxin's resonance fought back. Go, she screamed. Jake's vision blurred as he turned and ran toward the hatch. Plasma bolts seared past him. He dove into the shuttle, sealed the hatch, and punched the thrusters. Through the cockpit window, he saw Cirrus standing before the core, arms raised, eyes glowing with unearthly purple light. The countdown reached 0. The core exploded in a blinding wave of energy. The shock wave struck the shuttle, sending it tumbling through space. Jake fought the controls as the platform disintegrated behind him. When the blast cleared, the Dominary fleet was in chaos. Their drones spun out of control. The warships powered down, their systems crippled. The toxin's network had collapsed. Jake drifted in orbit, heart hammering. He stared at the empty void where the command platform had been. Cirrus was gone. 3 days later, Earth Defense Command declared victory. The Dominary fleet retreated beyond the outer colonies. Humanity stood defiant, unbroken. Jake sat alone on a bench overlooking Earth from the orbital station. The sky shimmered with auroras, remnants of the energy surge that had destroyed the Dominary network. He held Cirrus's metal wrist cuff in his palm, the only thing recovered from the wreckage. She gave us everything, Colonel Evans said, standing beside him. Jake nodded, eyes wet. Yeah, she did. The stars beyond the auroras twinkled, vast and eternal. Jake closed his eyes and heard her voice again. You saved me. Now it's my turn. And she had.